Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our DEC town hall. This is on the unofficial side in our continuing efforts for outreach, and we have out the Osceola, Polk, and Orange County DECs on the line. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic is a monumental crisis. We haven't seen a pandemic like this in over 100 years, in 1918, and understand that so many families are suffering, whether they're still staying at home and working from home, whether they've lost their jobs. So many seniors who are isolated right now, being so vulnerable, so many young people missing key milestones, and our first responders on the front lines helping out, and our small businesses just trying to hang on through this crisis. I'm pleased that Christine, Shayla, Vivian, Delaney, and Ray from our team have chosen to volunteer to be on the line today. And this gives us an opportunity to discuss some key issues as Democrats as it relates to the pandemic that I know a lot of you in our local DECs are concerned about. And this will be of a format where you'll be able to share this video later on with so many of our DEC members who maybe didn't have the time to be able to be here today. First, I wanted to talk about our conversations today with Dr. Jill Biden, hopefully the next First Lady of the United States. She, along with former Vice President Joe Biden, have done their best to traipse the country telephonically to be able to hear our concerns. And when we discussed, we met with Bold PAC and Dr. Jill Biden. Bold PAC is the political arm of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And she stressed in her message the importance of science and testing and monitoring and ultimately research to get to a vaccine, and how we have to get back to truthfulness again in the federal government. I know something we all have shuddered at as we've seen President Trump's untruthful statements made over and over again, and stress the buildup of federal infrastructure to handle the COVID-19 response. Another key commitment that she and obviously former Vice President Biden has made is having a diverse cabinet, one that reflects the diversity of America, something that's really important, I know, to all of you, as well as to Bold PAC and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. When I got to speak to her, I talked to her a lot about some of the things that are affecting all Central Floridians, not just for COVID-19, but over the long term. Higher wages, affordable housing, fixing the traffic around here. That's something that affects so many of us. When we look at higher wages, so many of our brothers and sisters work in the tourism and service industries, making less than $15 an hour. So passing a robust minimum wage, getting the unemployment system to work right would be a big help, as well as investing in education opportunities for people to improve themselves. And then affordable housing. We know so many folks, because housing has gotten so expensive around here, can't afford housing. And we need to look at it in multiple levels, from helping out renters and more public housing to helping out with folks being able to afford their mortgage. And in this time of need, to make sure that we can have real mortgage relief. The CARES Act, which I'll go into in a little bit in more detail, gives the opportunity to have a year-long forbearance agreement. But as many of you may know, I'm fighting to get rid of the balloon payments that come at the end of them with the Save Our Homes Act. So that came up today. And of course, fixing the traffic and national infrastructure package is something the United States desperately needs. It could help us with a long-term recovery from this pandemic, and also make sure that people aren't spending half their day out on the roads, particularly on the dreaded I-4. While we have the first phase done, we need to get beyond I-4 Ultimate. I also talked about key issues affecting the Hispanic community uniquely, given it was a Bold PAC meeting, including helping out with the recovery of Puerto Rico after it sustained the deadly Hurricane Maria and earthquakes, and also Venezuela TPS. We have over 200,000 Venezuelans About a third of them live here in Central Florida. Some of them are citizens and can vote, and some of them are immigrant refugees who've fled because of the crisis of the tyrannical Maduro regime. So Venezuela TPS, a key issue, 2 of them for our local Hispanic communities. We also have the treat of hearing from former Attorney General Eric Holder today. And he specifically talked about protecting voting rights and the census during this COVID-19 pandemic. And I know those are 2 really important issues that we've heard from a lot of our local Democrats. AG Holder mentioned that COVID-19 brings many challenges. And so he gave us several recommendations that we're going to be fighting for. First, we were able to get $400 million in the CARES Act for voting grants. And while that is just a drop in the bucket, admittedly, it can help. And as you'll see tomorrow, and as our Ag Commissioner, Nikki Fried, has brought up already, the state of Florida is eligible for $20 million in grants to help out with making voting, to help with voting financial needs, as we will see probably a huge uptick in vote by mail. And so we need to make sure that we're drawing down that funding. I'll be joining a letter with Congresswoman Murphy and Congresswoman Debbie Mercasel-Powell and others who to push Florida to get that money. And then we need to add more as we go into the CARES 2 Act that we're currently debating. We also need to increase no excuse vote by mail, or what Eric Holder is encouraging us to all call vote at home. Whether you call it vote by mail or vote at home, and the reason he is encouraging that term is it really lends in nicely with the concern that people are staying at home right now to protect themselves and their family from the pandemic. So vote at home really gets at that meaning. But whether it's vote by mail, another good term, or vote at home, we're fortunate enough where we have no excuse voting here in Florida. So on that way, we're ahead of the game. They're also pushing for online registration and same-day voter registration on election day. So obviously, we already have online registration. That's been a big help, and I know a lot of the DECs have taken advantage of that. We don't have same-day registration. That's going to be hard to do with the Republican legislature, but it's something he's encouraging states to do whenever possible. We also need safe and healthy polling places, he encouraged. So we'll be working with our local supervisors to make sure that all voters can be safe and healthy should they choose to go to vote in person. And that includes social distancing, protecting our poll workers, any other needs that our healthcare professionals tell us we're going to need. He also encouraged us to fight to increase the amount of time of early voting for a month or more, so that there's not this pressure in the last two weeks to 1 week for early voting. As you know, in Florida, there has to be at least 1 week of early voting, but that week prior is discretionary. We really need to fight to make sure at least our local supervisors of elections are having this full 2 weeks of early voting, and we need to push to have a full month because we know we can't have these lines that are tightly packed, snaking around the side of buildings for hundreds of yards like we saw in Wisconsin just recently. We also need to increase voter education so that voters know all their new voting options, should they have them. And that's going to be a key role for the DECs as well as our supervisors of elections. He also stressed that we need to shore up the Postal Service's financial issues right now through no fault of their own, which is going to be even more important as we do vote by mail in increased fashion. I know in our Democratic caucus meetings so far, which we have twice a week telephonically, every meeting has talked about not only helping out state and local government relief to keep our cops, our firefighters, our teachers, our nurses and EMTs on the job, along with other faithful state and local public servants, but to make sure we're protecting the post office. I also want to highlight there was a lawsuit filed this week. We applaud those groups, including locally Alianza, for suing the state in federal court for what we think is a discriminatory voting restriction right now, which is that vote by mail has to be received by election day. There's been a recent Supreme Court precedent, even with this Supreme Court that's leaning more conservative, as we all know. They held in the Wisconsin case of that recent debacle they had for their election that the supervisors needed to accept all vote by mail that were postmarked by election day, not received by election day. And of course, we know over the last couple elections, we've seen tens of thousands of valid votes, not just Democratic votes, but votes from all over the spectrum, not counted. It's disgraceful because the post office is an extension of the federal government. You are handing your ballot to the federal government's possession the moment that the post office takes it in possession. Heck, the moment that you put it in your mailbox, which also has federal protections. So we certainly are pleased with that lawsuit because we believe it comports with values of making sure everybody can vote. Of course, there's other lawsuits right now about felon restoration of rights. It looks like the judge is going to rule in the favor of scrapping the current system, at least in part, because it's unworkable. It's nearly impossible for our returning citizens to even understand how much they owe. In many cases, it's taken hours and hours just to even come up with that. It's a broken system, and Judge Henkel looks like he's about to rule on this as well. His initial statements looked like he was going to put forward a new system. Of course, that will have to go up on appeal to the 11th Circuit, but the 11th Circuit upheld his injunction already. So we can have this ready for this election so that all those returning citizens who are right now suffering through a poll tax, through excessive fees and fines that they can't possibly afford, that they're going to be able to vote. Some other House Democratic efforts on voting, we signed on to a letter from Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. Most of the Florida delegation, at least on the Democratic side, signed on urging Governor DeSantis to expand vote by mail in light of the coronavirus pandemic. Credible reports indicating that some poll workers have tested positive. So we want to do everything we can to expand by mail. Then there's Representative Malinowski of New Jersey's upcoming coronavirus legislation that includes provisions mandating no excuse voting and vote by mail options in every state, and makes funds available for the rapid implementation of both. Bills before COVID that we passed through, of course, H.R. 1, the landmark bill that addressed voter access, elections integrity, election security, political spending, making sure that presidents of the United States have to disclose their tax returns, and ethics for all three branches of government. Of course, that bill, which was a good government bill coming from the House, was deemed a power grab bill from the Senate, probably because they just don't believe in making sure that everybody can vote. That's a big ploy to try to suppress the vote. You see a lot of colleagues on the Republican side in the Senate trying to do just that. Then there's H.R. 645, automatic voter registration, which is a great concept. It would say DMVs, and in this state we call it the DHSMV, would automatically enroll people into federal elections. We don't have jurisdiction over the state elections, but presumably the state could opt into doing that, unless they decline to register, or they don't meet the voter registration eligibility requirements, or they're already registered to vote. That would get a lot more people voted. Of course, right now you at least get the option to register to vote when you get your driver's license. Then there's the America Votes Act, which permits an individual who has a present ID condition of voting to be able to, by a sworn written statement, swear to who they are, to help with some of these onerous ID requirements. A lot of folks don't have state or federal IDs, especially as you get to be a senior or otherwise you're not driving anymore. You may not have a state ID anymore, at least not a valid one. And so you lose track, and then you go to vote, and then they try to shut you down. Our seniors deserve better. Others who may not have IDs but are already on the rolls and they're the only one voting under that name, these are suppression techniques. Then there's HR 1514 to establish a minimum period of early voting. We co-sponsored bills for Native American voting rights advancement, for establishing new criteria and allowing for pre-clearance again. Obviously, we know the old Voting Rights Act, part of it was struck down, and Florida used to be protected by that, where all new voting policies had to be approved by the federal courts until about 3 years ago. That helped out with when Senator Scott, at the time governor, tried to purge 200,000 voters, including veterans, from the rolls. So that's something, we don't have that protection right now. We, of course, passed that out of the House already. And then increasing access to polls, as well as Representative Murphy's bill to require the Department of Homeland Security to notify state, local, and members of Congress if there's credible evidence of intrusion by foreign powers. We didn't get to learn the full details until literally right after 2018, after the midterms, about the true nature of the intrusion. And even that, most of it can't be public still because it's classified, even though it shouldn't be. And so that's an important bill by my colleague, Stephanie Murphy. And of course, the SHIELD Act, which would establish a duty to report election interference on social media and other advertising and paid campaigns through all sorts of different ways you could do political ads, because foreign powers are barred. It's illegal for them to try to intervene in our democracy, and we saw that in 2016. So much so that the Russians set up a rally in Palm Beach County with Republican Trump supporters, complete with Hillary Clinton in a cage and a dancing Bill Clinton. If there's anything more shameful, I could not think of it in a million years. We need to stop that sort of stuff. Then census. The census was the other key issue that former Attorney General Holder talked about today. First, we need a timely count. He stressed that, but everybody supports some of the delays because we're in the middle of a pandemic and we don't want to come up on deadlines where people aren't counted. So there is bipartisan support, but we need it timely, as in before the end of the year, in time for redistricting next year. The next thing, new state and congressional maps have to be in place before the 2022 election. We shouldn't be voting on old maps that were gerrymandered and well documented to be gerrymandered by the Republican Party across the nation in state and federal maps. And in states that have elections in 2021, like New Jersey and Virginia, they need to be provided that information early. The Census Bureau needs to provide data to legislatures on a rolling basis, especially those in the early voting states that we mentioned. People are saying that's happening on the local and state level, but not to the extent that they'd like. We also need completing and processing the census as efficiently as possible, even if we have to reallocate resources as necessary. And our Oversight Committee is on that in the House. States also have to understand the changes to the redistricting process as a result of the census delay. So any state legislators on the line, start thinking about what is it going to mean to this go-round if you get this census criteria and data at this point or at this date. What's that going to mean to your process, and what are you going to need to do to change to make sure that we can have our maps still on time? Those are all going to be key things. Then we also need transparency in redistricting. We just can't let delayed census info justify stopping public input into redistricting. We saw last time the redistricting hearings were an absolute mockery and fraudulent injustice. What was purportedly the most open and transparent redistricting process ever back in 2011, the plaintiffs in the suit that sued the state were able to show that the actual map didn't come from any of the public input they did during those dozens of meetings across the state. It was drafted by a Republican operative who submitted it under the name of a law student who worked for the Republican Party of Florida, who didn't even know that they submitted the map under his name. And that map, the plaintiffs were able to show most closely resembled the map that the Republicans put forward. Therefore, scrapping the maps, and the federal judge ended up drawing the map in conjunction with plaintiffs like League of Women Voters, La Raza, and others. We can't have that happen again. Last thing, we need to all be aware where we're at the census. The national average is 57.3% response rate. Florida's average is 55.1%. We need your help. Orange County is in the lead right now with 54.5%. So we're getting close to the Florida average and still lagging the national average. Polk is in second with 53.7%. And then Osceola is trailing at 48.7%, my home county. So we really need all of our activists to step up to encourage all communities, whether it's faith leaders or your coworkers, whether it's different groups you're working with, whether you're knocking on doors, you're probably more likely you're going to be making phone banking calls. Make sure to put in a plug for people to fill out the census. For every 1% that we don't have people filling up the census, we lose millions of dollars. And those of you who were on our recent teleconference about the census heard more direct numbers on that. Next, I want to go into the CARES Act itself and the other bills we passed and the funding efforts. Let me start with the timeline. We saw the Trump administration be in denial well into early March that this was a serious pandemic. The president called it a hoax at a rally as late February. So we rolled up our sleeves, and in early March, we passed the first funding bill to help support hospitals and testing, to make sure that testing was free, and we ended up helping out with telehealth for Medicare for our seniors. They said they weren't going to sign it, then they finally did agree with it in the Senate, and then Trump signed it. Then there was a second bill, the Families First bill, where we got the first national sick pay and family leave policy in federal statute applying to Americans. That's in addition to the one we got to apply to all federal workers this past year, things that your House Democrats are fighting for. And this, of course, applies only to COVID-19 illnesses and to care for loved ones who had COVID-19. For businesses 500 employees or less. 90% of major businesses already provide this, but we're still told that there's a huge gap. So we're going to continue that fight. But it was your Democrats that got in this new benefit for millions of Americans, the first in its history. Of course, that lapses at the end of the year. So we got to continue to fight to build upon that. And we're going to fight to extend it, of course. In addition, we fought in the CARES Act. And I want to talk about some of those issues as well. $2.2 trillion Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act. The CARES Act represents the largest, most historic size response and relief act that we've ever passed. 2.2 trillion is as big as it sounds. We've never passed anything close to that. Just to give you an idea, between TARP and the American Investment Act, that was about 1.5 billion, 1.6 billion, around there. So this is still even much larger than that. Of course, it comes with a couple key provisions: $1,200 in checks for most Americans. Those make $75,000 or less. For those making between $75,000 and $99,000, you'll get a smaller check. Of course, there's also $500 per child. We already finished the first round by the end of April, and that was our Social Security beneficiaries and our supplemental security income beneficiaries, taking care of our seniors, those with disabilities. If they had direct deposit, 99% of them do. So for anybody who hasn't, if you're a constituent, please reach out to our office or we'll connect you with your member of Congress. But the vast majority of seniors have now received these checks. And now, as of May 1st onward, we've been on the second round. That's all other taxpayers who have direct deposit right now. If you don't have direct deposit, you really need to request it. And you could go on the IRS online portal at the Get My Payment app. That's the Get My Payment app. You really, really, really need to request direct deposit. If you already have a direct deposit for past tax refunds from 2018 or 2019, if you were fortunate enough to be able to get those, the IRS has that. information already, but many of you either didn't get a tax refund or you owed money, particularly if you're a small business. I know as a small business, I always had to pay at the end of each year. Then you're going to want to register in the Get My Payment app to make sure that you're getting direct deposit. Otherwise, it could take weeks to months. And it was Congress's intent that this relief gets to you in April or May. After all, rent is due, mortgages payments are due, and utilities and lots of other things that we all know, like food and healthcare, are due. So we know how important that is. As you know, I led the charge in a bipartisan fashion to request a moratorium on foreclosures and on evictions, and also on utility shutoffs. And all three of those were granted. That's one of the few bipartisan victories we saw on the state level, with DeSantis Governor DeSantis granting that. Obviously, there are a lot of other things that are lacking, but that was one of the big bipartisan victories that we had. We just sent out another letter today requesting an extension of those moratoriums for foreclosures and evictions. Unfortunately, we didn't get any Republicans this go round, but we'll continue to push. Some frequently caused delays for your payment. One, it could take 1 to 3 days for your financial institution to process it. Two, if you use a tax preparer like H&R Block, TurboTax, or others I know I have in the past, they may have already set up a direct deposit account for prior refunds. So you're going to want to reach out to your tax preparers to make sure you get that. Some of you may have old bank accounts in file, particularly for your 2018 tax return. You may not use that bank account anymore, or maybe closed. So you're really going to want to update your information, or at least make sure to look out for it in that old bank account if it's still open. We also put in a fail-safe for those of you who, for once the payment is sent, the IRS has to send you a notice of payment within 15 days of sending the payment. That lists the method by which your payment was made, the amount of the payment, and the phone number for an appropriate point of contact at the IRS. While we have various points of contact with the IRS, we don't have one specific designated one, so it does take them a while to get back to us as we reach out to them. So this is going to be a key thing to help, that you'll get an individual point of contact as a taxpayer to either help through yourself or through our office to get the stimulus check should you not have received one. We also, in CARES 2, we're working on potentially another round of stimulus checks. And also, it's a big priority for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus to ensure that families that have mixed citizens and immigrants aren't barred anymore. Can you believe American citizens married to immigrants are ineligible right now for the stimulus checks? Many of them are veterans who served abroad and married immigrants when they were serving abroad, and this is just disgraceful. We prefer it to be for everybody who has an ITIN. That's going to be hard to get into this package, but we're going to fight for that too. The second big part of it was the $600 federal unemployment benefit for up to 4 months. This was a huge victory on the federal level for so many folks who've lost their jobs. Over 30 million Americans have applied for unemployment over the past few weeks, including over 1 million Floridians. That $600 benefit is on top of $275 per week in state benefits for 12 weeks. It applies to former employees, employees who've lost hours, and the federal benefit applies to independent contractors as well, a big new expansion of that benefit. And for federal contractors, since you don't qualify for the state $275, you may qualify for an additional $275 under the CARES Act. So whether you're a former employee who lost hours or an independent contractor who lost hours, you may be eligible for up to $875 in unemployment benefits. We know that the state website has been a disaster, although through the fight of your state legislators and Democratic members of Congress, through letter after letter and press conference and every way we can through our oversight powers to push them, we've seen some improvements. So we gave them $29 million from the federal level, from the U.S. Department of Labor, to help fix the website. We've seen 72 new servers added, new paper applications, which for people who are at their wits' end, I understand that you're going to want to use those. You could get that sent in for free via FedEx through your state representative or state senator's offices. And there's also 3 new call centers that they've added. But having spoke with Secretary Satter, they can only handle 50,000 calls a day, which is a lot, may seem like a lot, but in certain days they've had over 1 million. So over the last 2 weekends, they've attempted to repair some of the items on the site and add new applications. That's led to it being somewhat improved, but we know it's still been a big issue. They also, the new application was finally approved 2 weeks ago for those independent contractors we're talking about. And for our independent contractors, you're entitled to retroactive benefits as of March 9th, which will be great once they actually put up the application for retroactive benefits. For employees, you're also entitled to retroactive benefits as of the date of your application. Many of you applied and got dropped. I know there's going to be some difficulty proving that. Our office is ready to help you with that. But that application also, no retroactive applications are ready yet, but we hear they're going to be ready soon, so we'll keep you posted. The biweekly job search was waived once again. It was supposed to lapse this past weekend, but it has been extended to March 9th, so that's coming up soon. Obviously, we saw as of yesterday, there was over 1,047,000 claims, 735,000 have been processed, and about 478,000 claims have been paid. So we see numbers improving from when it was 7 and 8 of the folks who applied in Florida didn't receive their benefits. So we're better than that. Now we have a little less than half of the folks who applied have received their benefits, but that's still dismal and well below the average. And our biggest concern is that over 250,000 people who were denied benefits. There's a couple of reasons for that. Some we can fight for, some of them may need to change in law. You need to have enough base period to qualify, so you need to have earned $3,400 during the base period, which is the first 12 months of the last 15 months. Those of my team on the line who serve with me on staff in the state legislature know we fought to try to pass a bill to fix that. A lot of our journeymen in our building trades unions, they work on and off, but they may work 80, 100 hours during the weeks they are working. So that's a big problem for them that still needs to be fixed. I know our state legislators are working on that. Sometimes they may have multiple claims in 1 year, but there are folks who, if you run out of your state benefits, may also be eligible for the federal benefits in addition to that. But that application is not ready yet. So yet again, another thing that's pending that is hurting some folks out there. Some of the applications may have been incomplete, no doubt, in all likelihood, because the website's been a disaster. But that's still something we have to look into. And then there's been glitches in the system on top of that. There have been people who have been denied because they didn't comply with the biweekly job search, even though that's been waived. Obviously, a glitch in the system. There's also independent contractors who applied before the application was ready. We know from some anecdotal evidence at our office that they've been denied wrongfully too. So we're going to continue to work with you all. Even though these are state jurisdiction cases, because DEO is a state agency, we have been given there has been agreement to give us some limited authority to be able to help out our state legislators who are overwhelmed by the number of cases. So I spoke with Secretary Satter today, because the one thing we don't have is a point of contact. We have a portal we could use to upload information, but it's been slow for them to be able to respond to us to really help with constituents who have these hardest cases. So we're gonna continue to work on that stuff. You could also appeal if you're denied wrongfully, but you have 20 days to do so. If you have any questions, you can call our office, 407-452-1171. That is, of course, available for all of our constituents. But the appeal still needs to go either through you yourself or with your state representative or state senators. They are not recognizing us to assist with those appeals, but with the applications themselves. Next, I want to talk about the small business programs. We had $367 billion in loan programs, including a $349 billion paycheck protection program that was funded. There have been positives and negatives about this program. Positive is that we got money out in the street quickly, which was very important because 75% of it has to be used to make payroll. It has to be used to keep Americans employed. That was a huge victory. We're helping small businesses who are the most vulnerable, and we're keeping folks employed. Florida received 88,997 Paycheck Protection Program loans. So that's 88,997 small businesses in that first round that received a total of $17.8 billion. So 75% of that, approximately $15+ billion, went out on the street to keep Americans, keep Floridians employed. But there were problems to it. We saw big banks front load their applications for the biggest of clients. We saw national chains, restaurant chains, hotel chains, auto chains that took advantage, and many of them are going to have to give that money back because there was just a new regulation from the Treasury that says if you're a big enough company to have access to capital markets like stock markets or bond markets, you'll likely not be able to meet the certification that you need of those loans. We saw about $1 billion of that $349 billion go to companies associated with Fortune 500 companies. And of course, the Oversight Committee we just put together, I heard from Majority Whip Jim Clyburn today, the chairman of that committee, discussed that they are going to go after all the loans that are 10 million or above to scrutinize them carefully. And, for folks who don't return those loans by the beginning of next week, they're going to be out of the safe harbor period and they're going to get fined. And it's going to cost them more than it was ever worth. And they're going to have to pay back that money plus interest plus fines. So there's going to be a lot of incentive for people to pay back those loans. But we were obviously really disappointed by that. Wells Fargo and Bank of America self-imposed $10 billion caps. Well, at least Bank of America did. And then Wells Fargo had to because of a bank account scandal that they got caught up in. The good news is the Federal Reserve is now buying some of those loans off of them, so it frees up some of those caps. But what we saw as a terrible combination was if you were a small business with a big bank, you probably got screwed. And it's a lesson. I was a small business owner for 12+ years and had to make a payroll twice a month. Working with the credit unions and the small community banks, it's a better deal for our small businesses. They look after you more. And of course, we know that a lot more small businesses banking with them the first run got those loans. But we knew that it was flawed. So when we went back up to Washington 2 weeks ago, we fought to get another round of Paycheck Protection Program money of over $370 billion in small business relief, including $310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program, which we fought for $60 billion to be set aside for community banks, credit unions, and mission-based financial institutions to help give a better shot to our veterans, women and minority-owned businesses, our smallest businesses, and we also fixed loopholes that excluded small family farms. It also included $10 billion in emergency grants and $50 billion in new disaster assistance loans. And it made a big difference. We saw the second round so far, 185,904 businesses in Florida, small businesses, got paycheck protection loans. That's more than double round one. And it was for a smaller amount, for $12.2 billion so far. So we know more is still coming. So what that tells me is that many of the small businesses that were in queue are getting the loans, and many of them are much smaller because the loans are much smaller, yet they're going to many more businesses. If you are not in queue yet and you're a small business, what are you waiting for? Please do it now. And you're going to want to apply to the community banks and the credit unions or the small mission-based institutions like community development programs, because I think the other part is going to be tapped out soon. Keep in mind, even spending nearly $700 billion, that's still enough to provide loans to 10% of all small businesses. So we know 90% of businesses still aren't going to get it. But the key is this is all about getting money out in the street quickly knowing that 75% of it has to be spent on payroll, on keeping people employed. Of course, you have to keep 100% of your workforce to get it all forgiven. And if you let go some of your folks, you get a smaller percentage forgiven. So it really encourages people to keep employees on the job. And we've heard from a lot of employees who either got called back to their job or kept their jobs because of the Paycheck Protection Program. In the CARES fight, your House Democrats fought for what I think are the most important of all these issues, which is more funding for healthcare and for the pandemic response. After all, this is a pandemic. It's a health crisis. So we fought to get a new $75 billion for hospitals and another $25 billion for more testing. That's on top of the $130 billion we got in the CARES Act originally for hospitals. We saw in that first tranche of funding that Florida got $2.2 billion to nearly 22,000 providers in Florida. We got another $389 million in the second tranche to 637 hard-hit providers. That mobile testing is helping us ramp up. We know there's not a lot of testing. As many of you know, President Trump rejected the World Health Organization's testing early on that they had developed in late January, early February, and tasked the CDC, who proceeded to then come up with a contaminated test that led us to be 4 to 5 weeks behind from if we simply would have worked with our international partners. This is a classic example of America First policy failing the American people, because we all know we're not in this alone. And of course, now President Trump has defunded our contribution to the World Health Organization, which is a tragedy because we have a world health crisis going on. So these are all more reasons why we absolutely need President Biden in that White House to bring some sanity back to this. But this testing, we've heard from CDC, they believe that we'll be able to get up to the 3 million tests a week that we've been told we need by the end of May. I will believe it when I see it. I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I've heard it over and over and over again. We ask them every week, and they tell us it's coming soon. So that's what they're telling us, but I will believe it when I see it. We did give them the funding to do that, but they've still refused to use the full extent of the National Defense Production Act, which would have commandeered all industries that we needed to help with more testing. Because it's not just the testing, it's the swabs, it's the reagents, and then of course the personal protective equipment. And then we needed a national procurement strategy. They refused to do that. They haven't passed the buck to the state strategy, unfortunately. And that's led to states and cities competing against each other, which is disaster. And it's a waste of taxpayer money, because when you bid up the price, it's taxpayer money that ends up getting misused because you have to pay more than you should, more than market rate. This testing has also helped with a really critical issue, and that is we've seen communities of color get harder hit than other communities. We've seen a higher death rate among COVID-19 among the African-American community, particularly in Polk County. We've seen more Hispanics percentage-wise contract this COVID-19 virus than any other demographic, with African-Americans close behind. So we fought with everything we had to get mobile testing sites, and we are getting results. We saw 2 weeks ago, finally, a mobile testing site at Osceola Heritage Square Park. We thank our city and county commissioners who made that happen. That's equidistant to BVL, to where it was one of the hardest hit areas, to Kissimmee, and to St. Cloud. We're working on one for Point Siena that's been recently requested. We also have the federally qualified health clinic down there, primary care Point Siena, which can help out along with our hospitals that have been stepping up. In Orange County, our county commissioners, along with Mayor Demings, stepped up to work with us for clusters on the east side in the district, in East Orlando and East Orange County. In fact, we had testing in Avalon Park, Waterford Lakes area starting today. And we've seen other testing scheduled for East Orlando, Cimarron area. Another issue that it was Democrats on the commission that fought for. And of course, we fought to get mobile testing through predominantly African-American communities throughout Polk County in the district that were hardest hit. I mentioned that higher than normal death rate among African-Americans who got coronavirus. And these are the hard issues that we have been adamant about taking on. A lot of folks, you'll see, they just shrug and say, well, that's sad, that's too bad. Our hearts and our prayers go out to them, and then they don't do anything. We're taking on these issues, and our team got together with our local federally qualified health clinic, Central Florida Healthcare, and we got mobile testing first in Haines City and Davenport, next to Winter Haven and Lake Wales, Auburndale, and we're even helping out in districts that aren't even ours, Fort Meade, because we had one of our local state representatives there just beg us to help out because there was a higher than normal cluster of African-American deaths to COVID-19. We must make sure that all communities that are vulnerable, that they get our attention. Lastly, I want to end by talking about state and local funds and where we go from here. And then we're going to go into questions. We passed $150 billion for state and local funds. That's about $8.3 billion that's going to go to the state budget, and a little less than $4 billion that's going to go to the local budgets. We saw the deficit, the shortfall that Florida's state budget could see could be anywhere from $8 to $10 billion. But again, a restriction we didn't include in the CARES Act, the Treasury Department put restrictions about what you could use it for. That's really hurt the state of Florida from being able to plug in that $8 to $10 billion gap. And that's only for the 2020 to 2021 budget. We have some key priorities that we passed as Democrats, whether it was funding teacher pay raises, an issue near and dear to the Soto family, whether, and with my wife Amanda, whether it's the Sadowski Fund being fully funded for affordable housing. Those are funding key environmental programs. Those are going to be key things we have to fight for. Something that happened when I was in the state legislature, and of course their state reserves is $3.9 billion, which is going to be very helpful. Something that happened when I was in the state legislature, I would routinely hear people say, oh, we don't see any of this money from the Obama administration, from the American Investment Act. Meanwhile, Florida was utilizing $3 to $4 billion in money from that investment from 2007 to about 2011. These are keeping cops and teachers, firefighters and nurses and other state and local servants on the job and serving during a pandemic when we need them most. So we need to have flexibility. We also saw a lot of grants come in for some of our local governments, from Kissimmee receiving everything from COVID-19 to housing vouchers to airport money, to Orlando receiving millions in community development block grants, St. Cloud receiving community development block grants. We saw Polk County, Osceola, and Orange County receiving millions. Orange looks like it's going to get over $245 million, so that's going to be a big help. We saw Lake Wales recently in Winter Haven receive housing vouchers and public housing dollars, both Lake Wales public housing and Winter Haven public housing, which is good because a lot of the small cities in Polk County were left behind in the community development block grants. We saw also Bartow's Airport, Kissimmee's Airport, Winter Haven's Airport, and Lake Wales Airport get funding to help with budget shortfalls due to COVID-19 and to help with their response. But we need to fight for between $750 billion to $1 trillion for our state and local governments, because it's not just the 2020, 2021 budget, but we're going to get hit hard for the 2021, 2022 budget. And we have a lot of our brothers and sisters in labor, hardworking public servants that I mentioned that we need to fight to help protect, because we need them to stay on the front lines of this pandemic. We had education stabilization to help out, $30 billion to help out our local colleges, universities, and K through 12. UCF just got $51 million in their first of 2 rounds of funding. Half of that gets to go to student relief. Valencia got $27.68 million. Polk State got 6.15 million. And as I said, half that has to go to student relief, which is key for housing or for tuition, for technology, healthcare, childcare, food. So those are going to be key. And then they're going to get a second round. And then the K through 12, they're going to get an equal amount, but that has to go through the state legislature. But as Barbara Jenkins, our superintendent for Orange County, mentioned the other day, they're going to need more than that. That's just going to hold them through this year. So that's why this is going to be key to have the state and local funding so that we could fully fund education. Unfortunately, the Department of Education excluded Dreamers from the student relief, even though there was no restriction. That'll be a big fight that the CHC is going to undertake to reverse that really terrible restriction they put on. There's 6 months of forbearance for student loans. There's a $500 billion major business fund that we just put together that pandemic oversight committee for today. The members got named to it. So an additional $50 billion for food assistance to help out Second Harvest, Feeding Tampa Bay, and others. Finally, to reopening the economy. First, it's all about testing and monitoring to make sure we know who has the coronavirus and to be able to monitor this to help others identify outbreaks. We also need to keep a close eye on our hospital capacity, which is right now in good shape in Central Florida. And we need to know if there's any major hotspots that come up. We saw a step-by-step approach and modest reopening. I know there's a lot of mixed feelings on that as we balance between the health priorities and the fact that 1 million Floridians are out of work. I know Mayor Demings has talked about maybe opening up barbershops and salons. So there's a lot of issues that that we're watching closely. We ultimately need a vaccine. There's some interesting work going on in New York, in Israel, and in the UK on these vaccines. There is one treatment in phase 2 for the FDA, remdesivir, that has shown 31% improvement in outcomes. That's opposed to all the false and dangerous fake remedies that President Trump has been pushing. And of course, and there's 2 in phase 1 FDA. And then in the CARES 2, we're also going to fight to try to get a long-term infrastructure package, and we need to improve our pandemic infrastructure. I know that's a lot of information. We want to make sure this is comprehensive so that for folks who couldn't make it today, they can view this video. And with that, we're going to turn it to questions. We have a half an hour for questions, so we really look forward to hearing those questions from all of our loyal DEC members who are fighting every day via telephone and video conference at the very least, and through other means to help out with Democratic candidates and the Democratic causes across Florida's 9th Congressional District. And with that, Shayla, let's start taking questions and comments.
Sure. Everyone, if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and press the unmute button on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. A lot of you are logging on via Zoom video. You can also send a question on the chat box on the bottom of your Zoom screen and send it over, and I can pose a question for the congressman. You may unmute yourself now.
Hi, Ms. Shayla. This is Dr. Johnson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. I'm the president of Osceola County Democratic Veterans Caucus of Florida. And I realize that families and individuals experiencing homelessness are more vulnerable to the infectious disease. In fact, here in Florida, in Orange County, Seminole, and Osceola County, we have approximately 2,010 homeless veterans. In Florida alone, we have 28,000. So what is the state doing to prepare for COVID-19 impact on the 896 unsheltered veterans? This is of utmost importance. These are the ones that are living in the woods, in the cars, and on the streets.
First of all, thank you for what you do to fight for our veterans in Osceola County and across the Florida's 9th Congressional District. We were able to allocate $10 billion for the health care of for our National Guard and for our U.S. military in their COVID-19 response, and then nearly $20 billion for the health care of our active service members and veterans, primarily through the VA hospital. We're honored to have the VA hospital in our district, in Florida's 9th Congressional District at Lake Nona. As many of you who participate in a lot of the extensive outreach town teleconferences, we have done one constituent one each week, one elected officials one each week, and have had conferences with our veterans, including our new director of the Orlando VA, Mr. Timothy Cook. And we also had outreach to everyone from the NAACP and the African American Chamber of Commerce of Polk County, to Hispanic Federation and Latin Poder X and Alianza, to meeting with the LGBTQ community, to meeting with the Muslim American and Jewish American communities, to small business owners, educators, you name it, unions. We have met with them. So it's really important. Outreach is part of this. So on that call, I think you did get to participate, if I remember, we did finally get some transparent numbers on the number of veterans who were affected by it. And the number of staff is still something we're working with them on. Our AFGE brothers are hard at work there. And they have really increased their protocols and have free testing. So for veterans that have any doubt about COVID-19, call the VA, work with our office. We're here to serve you. For homeless veterans, unlike other members of the general population, we have robust benefits for homeless veterans. In fact, homeless veterans are the only constituents we could probably get into pretty stable housing within 24 to 48 hours because there is the housing voucher programs for our VA. One of the issues continues to be when you have a combination of mental health issues or substance abuse issues coupled with a distrust of the federal government. Maybe you had a bad experience when you were in the military. I know in particular Vietnam veterans, I mean, think of the hardships they went through with a federal government and American people who attacked them when they came home. That sometimes they don't want to apply for them and they have a rightful mistrust. So we have a lot of trust relationships we have to rebuild as we get these housing benefits. But there is and has always been and will always be robust housing benefits for veterans that are actually in the best position of any American citizen to get housing benefits. And of course, I mentioned for the general populace in general, 3 of our cities just got new housing vouchers: Kissimmee, Winter Haven, and Lake Wales. Those would be for everybody else since we already have housing vouchers for our veterans. And that's in addition to the community development block grants that they're allowed to use already for housing vouchers. So they got additional funding for that. So hopefully that helps. And of course, we have Brian on my official side, a Navy veteran, along with Shasta Schaefer, a daughter of a Marine, Vietnam veteran who have office hours at the VA to help out, as well as we work on VA office. We have office hours, or we had them until recently because of the people working from home in Winter Haven as well. So please reach out to our office if we could be a help.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for everything you do.
And thanks for that great question. Let's take our next question.
Okay, I have a question from Dr. Linda Silverman. In spite of my efforts to fill out paper and electronic applications for weekly monies since I am self-employed, the DEO has not written back or called back. This has happened several times. What can you do to help?
So first of all, if for our self-employed, I mentioned early on, one of the big problems was they didn't roll out the application until 2 weeks ago. So some folks were denied simply because there was no application and they didn't know how to handle it. And so for many, you have to reapply using the new application that came out 2 weeks ago. You probably have done that already. So what we can do as of right now is help monitor it if you have already filled it out and open up a legislative inquiry with the Secretary's office. They have been slow to respond, which is why today I have asked for the Secretary to give us a point of contact. And he's looking into that for potentially starting next week as we get probably close to about 2/3 of the claims paid by the end of this week, or at least better than half, which is right now where we're at. We need that direct contact because we could only do a few additional things more than you could already do already. And of course, as you know, we don't have the same jurisdiction over DEO. We don't have jurisdiction over DEO compared to our state legislators, our state House members, our state senators. So they're the prime folks responsible for these cases, as opposed to the stimulus checks or the Paycheck Protection Program or the VA or some of these other clearly federal jurisdiction issues. But we have worked out with DEO to be able to help on some of these cases. So what I'd ask you to do, if you're a constituent, give us a call. We'll open up a legislative inquiry that may help put the pressure on them to respond. But it's really going to be key to get this legislative point of contact to make some real inroads on this if you've already filled out a complete application. But we may be able to look it over with you to help you out. There's no doubt this has been a disaster. It's hurt hundreds of thousands of families. And you may have applied in March and April's rent was due, or April's mortgage was due. May's mortgage is now due, or May's rent is now due. Now, we did fight to get the eviction moratorium, but that's, we'll see how long that lasts for. There is a moratorium still on writs of possession until July, though. So evictions and foreclosures can proceed, but you can't technically get the last document you need to actually kick people out of their house. That's really important for those of you who work in civil rights organizations and are advising tenants and homeowners who may be taken advantage of. Without the writ of possession, it doesn't matter how many calls, how many documents are submitted to the court, you can't kick someone out of the house. Now, some people may feel intimidated and leave voluntarily. They don't have to. They have a right to stay until that writ of possession is there. So call our office. For right now, we're going to continue to fight for a direct point of contact. And, we definitely empathize. What you've gone through is hell and back again, and it's a disgrace. And it happened back when I was in the state legislature, when I voted no on Governor Scott's plan to move all these applications online with a flawed system and cutting off benefits at 12 to 13 weeks and cutting benefits at $275. It was wrong back then, which is why I voted no, and it's wrong now. And we've had several inspector general reports, including one as recent as 2019, that told not only the last governor, but this governor, that this was a ticking time bomb. So we'll continue to work with you. And if you aren't a constituent, we'll work with to refer you to your state legislator or member of Congress.
Yeah, I am. Thank you. Thank you.
You bet. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry for what you're going through. It's such a disgrace, but we're here to help.
Thanks.
Let's take our next question or comment.
I don't have any here on the chat. If anybody has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and just press the button. I have nothing on the chat, Congressman. What?
You
hold
could
on.
You could also type in your question, and if it's simply a comment of an idea that you have, we're also here to listen to those as well. I think I saw a question on the chat, right?
Yes, I just got one. And it says, because of historic and ongoing structural racism, the coronavirus pandemic is hitting communities of color pretty hard. That same historic and structural racism also makes people of color more likely to experience homelessness. How will your office feature a way to gather and analyze data to determine whether people of color experiencing homelessness are being equitably protected and served during the pandemic? Dr. Johnson, thank you.
Thanks for that great question. So we as legislators request agencies to put this information together, and then the agencies have to do it. Now, we have been getting some numbers, but the Trump administration has been impossible to work with in getting a lot of the data. I mean, as it is, we've gotten at least some of the CDC data nationally about trends. So our best bet is to work with our local governments, which have been much more friendly to data, like the Orange County Health Department has been a great source of data. So we will continue to monitor that data, but really, we don't have to wait for it. I know, sitting here today, that communities of color don't have the same percentage of health insurance as the Anglo community. I know that the Hispanic community has one of the highest rates of COVID-19 cases. I know that the African American community has one of the highest mortality rates, which is why we've been getting to work, which is why we fought along with our state and local officials to get those mobile sites that are now in place in Waterford Lakes and Avalon Park, as well as in East Orlando that are scheduled. Those are hotspots where you have majority Hispanic communities. That's why we fought to get that mobile site between Kissimmee, BVL, and St. Cloud, and now we're working on the one in Point Siena. And that's why we fought to get mobile testing sites, and those are predominantly Hispanic communities, and that's why we fought for mobile testing sites in majority or large minority African American populations, along with Hispanic populations in Polk County. And in addition, it's the day-by-day casework of our great staff that helps out with a lot of that stuff. So if it's someone who lives in the district or is homeless in the district even, you can reach out to our office. We will have to connect you. But the key is we're not going to wait for the statistics. We know these things persist. And of course, we need to continue to fight to get free treatment because there's free testing. Now we have to continue our oversight to make sure that people aren't violating that rule and continue the funding. But we also need free treatment. And that's not something that's been guaranteed under law yet. And that's going to be really key, along with continuing to expand Medicaid and improving upon Affordable Care Act and getting a public option and so many of these other key issues to expand healthcare here in Florida. Let's take our next question or comment.
This is from Deborah Gale. What kind of congressional oversight will there be investigating the mismanagement of the Trump administration in this pandemic?
Sure. So first we have the committees of jurisdiction who already have oversight powers. For instance, I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has oversight over most businesses across America, healthcare, environment, telecommunications, the internet, energy, and consumer protection, like the FTC. So my committee will continue to focus on particularly CDC and HHS with regard to the response, FTC with regards to stopping price gouging, consumer protection to make sure we're not running over people's consumer rights during this time, environmental protections. There's a big fight to roll back air quality standards under the Clean Air Act and clean water standards under the Clean Water Act. When we need people to have clean water to wash their hands and clean air to breathe, we already know a recent Harvard study that just dropped a bombshell on DC showed that communities with bad air were more susceptible to COVID-19. And of course, so there's that oversight. Stephanie Murphy is on the Ways and Means Committee, so she'll be looking at the effects on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, an important part of that. Val Demings is on Judiciary and on Homeland Security. Those are two key committees to make sure how our airport and how our federal workers are being treated. And on Judiciary with how our immigrant communities are being treated. And then, of course, there have been several committees that have been created. There's the Pandemic Response Oversight Committee, in addition to the Oversight Committee, that was just formed after we voted for it a week and a half ago when we were up in Washington. Whip Clyburn, the Democratic Majority Whip, the well-esteemed and wise member from one of two from South Carolina, is the chairman. The Minority Whip, Steve Scalise, is the ranking member, and we've had folks assigned to that committee. No one from Florida, but someone from the CHC, Nydia Velasquez. Then we have the review board for the health response that is bicameral, that Donna Shalala got put on to oversee the health response of the pandemic in conjunction with what we're doing. So we're really proud of her being in the Florida delegation. She's a former HHS secretary, many of you may know. And we have been having informal hearings telephonically, but I'll be the first to say I wish we were already having full teleconference meetings. The Republicans have been stonewalling us. We've been trying to get a bipartisan change in the rules. That's just not going to happen. So we're simply going to vote, it looks like, just as a Democratic majority on rules allowing for telephonic hearings, because they just simply, they come up with every excuse in the world, but really they just don't want us to conduct our oversight powers. Now, keep in mind, there's many oversight powers that are still going on. I have a teleconference every day with constituents. I then write letters to agencies. I get our committee to write letters to agencies. They respond to them, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. We are continuing to put pressure on even our state and local governments and agencies. So we're still doing oversight every day, but we really need to get formal hearings together again. That's really important. I would have voted on it 5 weeks ago. And of course, when I am called back up to Washington, being young relative to Congress and having no pre-existing conditions or major health conditions, I will go up to vote when I'm called to vote, knowing that we have some members who are older, who have pre-existing conditions, who are more vulnerable. So I'm willing to take that risk on behalf of members of Congress who literally the doctors tell them they can't take the risk. You see me up for the last two big coronavirus recovery package votes, even speaking on the floor, and I'll continue to do so. But that's going to be key for oversight going forward. Those two new committees, the committee work of the Appropriations Committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, and the Ways and Means Committee, and the Oversight Committee in general. All those are going to be key. So thanks for that. Why don't we take our next question?
Second. Okay, this is from Donna. How soon will there be more testing available? It seems like the numbers are getting bigger in Florida, but I question whether we are still doing the same number of tests that we did even 2 weeks ago.
So there's more testing happening now, but it's still not where we need to be. We funded the $25 billion that nationally helped really ramp up testing in this last interim package. But we need to be testing 3 million Americans a month. That can be anywhere from, certain percentages based upon the region's risks. But we haven't had a accurate count from the DeSantis administration about what percentage they're testing. So right now, if you meet one of the CDC guidelines, if you need a test, please reach out to our office if you haven't been able to get one. If you've come into contact with someone with COVID-19 and you're either a senior or someone with pre-existing conditions, we need to get you a test. And we have the mobile sites going on right now. But we know we need to test more than those folks. And we're not at the level of testing yet where we're testing anybody who could be in lower risk groups, like being in those groups but not coming in contact with someone with COVID-19, or coming in contact with someone with COVID-19 and not having those groups, or just having flu symptoms in general without having any of those things happening. So we'll continue to fight, but we know the Trump administration totally screwed this up, left us 4 to 5 weeks behind, refuses to do the National Defense Production Act to utilize it to its full strength, refuses for a national procurement strategy. And of course, that's going to be one of the biggest issues for Americans to vote on in November, because they refuse to give us all the information that we need. They refuse to be transparent. They refuse to use every resource. They attack science. So all these things, I share your frustrations, and some of them, the only solution is to cast your vote in November. But we're going to continue to fight for the best we can get. We only have the House. We don't control the Senate, and we sure as heck don't control the presidency. And so every victory we have is a compromise right now, and it's not satisfactory, but we're at least getting some victories in. The Republicans were going to start this last supplemental with just a $250 billion extension of the Paycheck Protection Program with no set-asides for community banks, community credit unions, and to help out small minority-owned, women-owned, and veteran-owned businesses. And they weren't going to put in any new money for testing or hospitals. It makes no sense. So yes, testing continues to increase, but those numbers that you see aren't necessarily the numbers, because it takes a few days for the coroners to be able to report these deaths and for healthcare officials. So we do see very good hospital capacity right now in Central Florida, which is one of the key factors we're monitoring. But listen, everybody still needs to make sure they're adhering to social distancing, wear masks in public, and go out when you need to go out. And we need also hazard pay for our essential workers who don't have that luxury. Thanks for that great question. Let's take our next question.
My wife and I decided to take the opportunity to use the mobile COVID process that you worked out with the city of Kissimmee at the Bellalago area today. The lines weren't very long.
Yes. Thanks, Casmore.
And it was very, very quick.
I know that came up on the call, so we weren't sure whether they were going to get that together in time. It came up earlier in the week. That's great to see that. See, this is why we have these things, because I learn things sometimes. I'm stuck in conference calls half the day on federal issues. That's why having these communications each day. I wasn't sure whether they were going to get that together. Just for the edification of folks who haven't had a test yet, but may feel vulnerable or in one of these groups, what were the types of questions? What was it like when you got there?
Drove up, asked me if I had an appointment or not. I didn't have an appointment. Sat in the car for about 5 minutes. Next thing they did were to ask me questions, my age, where I live, took the sample, and that was it.
Yeah.
That was it, very quick.
Thanks, Casmore. And we know a lot of the Caribbean community in general has been hard hit from this, from across our various home islands. And we'll continue to go on Caribbean radio to spread the word as well. And they've been a big part of getting the word out in South Osceola and in Polk County.
Yes, yes. And thank you very much. We do appreciate the effort. And I called up a couple of friends and had them go over and take the test as well. And some of them live in the community next door to me. I live in Pine Ridge, and the next community to me, I just called them up and had them to go over.
And that's a key thing. Everybody who's on this phone, you are a community leader. You should know that already, but you are. If no one told you before, I'm telling you right now, if you're on this line, you are absolutely positively a community leader and an integral part of the Democratic Party. And we need to you also need to help me get these messages out. Mm-hmm. One big help, and I know Casmar is very good about it, and a lot of folks on the phone are, please review our social media, especially the Facebook posts. I don't spam you. I put up 1, maybe 2 a day, and there's valuable information there. Share those posts or tell your neighbors about it. Some folks are not on Facebook. Have them sign up for our email list. Some folks, they're young people and they're on Twitter. Have them sign up for our Twitter feed if they don't have email, or they don't want to use email, or they don't use Facebook. And then for some folks, you're not going to be at any of those things. So you need to spread the word through calling up some of your neighbors, old-fashioned style, like Casmore just did. Like we all know we have to do it during election time, and let them know about those things. Get on the local radios, talk to your local faith leaders, talk to your civil rights communities you're involved in, or your unions or others. And we meet with our unions just about every week. But what Casmore just did, we need to be doing for the testing sites. We need to be doing for the information that comes out about local community decisions. And we need to be doing this about voting information and about the census. Mm-hmm. So if no one asked you before, it doesn't get more official than me. I'm asking you to help me spread the word by following me on one of those social media pages. And if you have any questions, call our office up. We have your backs. We're going to get you any additional information because, yes, a lot of these things have to be brief because it's social media. You're not going to go into a full at-length conversation on something on Twitter, but you're going to get to the point of it. And if you have additional questions, we got your backs. We're going to help you with that. So thanks, Casmore, for not only going through what it's like to go through a mobile testing site, which we fought so hard to get, but also for stepping up and being a leader and not, I'm asking everybody now. So for anybody who's wouldn't be asked, you have been asked. but for not waiting to be asked and to just be proactive about it. You all are part of our team to get out this information to so many of those neighbors, folks we worship with, folks that we see in various workplaces and otherwise that we could get the word out with. So thank you for that. We really appreciate it, Councilman.
My pleasure. It's always a pleasure to help where I can.
You bet. Let's take our next question or comment.
This is from Tamika Lyles. An article reported last week that Florida was stopping medical examiners from releasing COVID-19 death data. It seems that Florida may not be the only state doing this. What is being done to ensure that the information being released to the public is accurate?
So first, we signed on the letters going after that issue. There's been less than transparent reporting at the nursing homes and retirement communities. And then some of the reports have come in slow, which is why you get instances like 2 days ago where we had one of the highest death counts in Florida's history during the pandemic. Many of those, 3/4 of them, happened well before that date. Were finally being reported. So we're putting pressure on the CDC and HHS on the federal level, serving on those committees, writing letters both from our perspective from Energy and Commerce and also to state officials. Our local officials have been pushing back to help with this, which is helpful to have some local Dems elected because they know that's wrong to hold that information back. And we continue to press because the CDC and HHS need us for certain budget items and for policy items. But again, we have a divided government, so we can't get everything we want to. And President Trump has been openly blocking them from giving us certain information. But we've gotten a lot more than they were giving at first, particularly with regard to healthcare numbers, which help us bolster a lot of these fights for these mobile testing sites. But I promise you, I won't wait for the numbers to act because they're trying to stifle it. And we know what's happening out there. And so, but we'll continue to put pressure on the state and local healthcare officials to get these numbers out in a prompt fashion. And we'll also count on our higher ed officials who've been great to do studies on what they refer to as the excessive death rate, which is all these, and it's a terrible thing that happens, but all these deaths that are happening that aren't reported COVID-19, but that are way above what it would normally be during this time of year. And they measured over the course of the last couple of years, and they're able to determine excessive death rate. That's how they determined that it was more likely nearly 3,000 people who died from Hurricane Maria. And that was ultimately what the island government in Puerto Rico adopted, was that nearly 3,000 person figure, because there's a lot of folks who died at home. They died of a heart attack, or they died of some respiratory disease, or someone thought they died from old age, when it was really COVID-19 that exacerbated a lot of these things. So I know there's going to be studies even beyond what the strict guidelines of a lot of these local health officials are saying are COVID-19 deaths. And we're going to look at that bigger number because we have to, for transparency purposes. We have to for public policy purposes. So even the number that we see ultimately won't necessarily be the final number, because those studies, for the one for Puerto Rico, came from my alma mater, GW. These studies are going to be key, and NYU is doing them, UF, I believe, is doing them, and a couple others. So we'll be looking out for that work beyond just the reporting that we're getting officially. And we have time for one more question, then I'm going to close.
With Disney World beginning phased reopenings starting May 20th with parts of Disney Springs, what can be done to enforce local pandemic guidelines, social distancing, wearing a mask, etc., without overly taxing local law enforcement agencies?
So first, like I meet with our union just about every week. Every 2 weeks, I've met with local representatives from Disney, Universal, and some of our hoteliers, so I can have a good sense of what their progression is and how to open and help them where we have common shared values. Obviously, I stand with labor on any issues dealing with that. And then also they lifted some of the ethics rules about us being able to solicit for charities. So we were able to get all those groups to help donate to Second Harvest and some of our Polk County food banks, both toiletries and, well, toiletries predominantly is what we focused on. And what they've told me is, when the parks reopen, they're not going to look necessarily exactly like they were before. We know, like after 9/11, when airports never were the same, and you're going to see less occupancy. They're going to go by what the state standards are at that time. So the phases that Governor DeSantis is putting out is going to be really important in tracking that. A lot of employees are going to be wearing masks. The lines are going to look very different. They may be checking temperatures going into the park, much like they have metal detectors now. There will be a lot more requirements for cleaning rides between uses and other common areas. And so those are just a few activities. Now, there is law enforcement that are on the park grounds. And of course, this is also an issue that requires balance. We heard everybody from Sheriff Russ Gibson to Mayor Demings talk about it with his former background, and Congresswoman Val Demings, that like, while we want to enforce these things and we need to give citizens warnings, we have to be really careful about not being too heavy-handed about it. We don't want some first-time offender to go to jail over this, but if someone's blatantly doing this or they're being reckless about it, there are criminal penalties and civil penalties in Osceola, and fines, and there are other tools in law enforcement's disposal. We just have to be really careful because there have been problems in the past with racial profiling and issues like that. So Orange County Sheriff's Office is on the scene there, and they can enforce a lot of the local requirements. But I know it's going to be in Disney's best interest to do that too, because having part of this is public confidence and confidence that it's safe. And so if you have big outbreaks that can be traced back to the park, that's going to hurt their attendance going forward for foreseeable future. So there's a lot of incentive, and of course I've talked to them about that, and they understand it. They do logistics pretty well, and as does Universal. And it's going to be key for all of our brothers and sisters from our local unions that work at the parks, whether it's Unite Here or the Teamsters, or whether it's our laborers, IBW, ironworkers, painters, or others, to keep us posted. This is a two-way street. As Casmore informed me that one of the mobile sites we're trying to get in Poinciana just happened today, and I hadn't been informed about it yet. There are things I learn all the time. So keep our office posted, keep me posted. I know many of you have participated in our weekly constituent town halls. We keep them to 1 hour so that they don't run on like our outreach ones that really have to go into more detail in specific areas, because we need to get into these issues. We need to get into the details. So I just want to end where I began by just thanking all of you for what you do for our democratic values, for our democratic candidates. And there are a lot of issues that are unique to our democratic values that come into play as a result of the pandemic. Everything from making sure that we have a voting system that can ensure everybody's right to vote is protected, to a full and robust census and redistricting process that is by the letter of the law and is fair, and we stop the gerrymandering that's happened in our nation's history and in our state's history, to key issues that are affecting all Americans that I got to speak with Dr. Biden about today, like raising wages, protected collective bargaining, getting more affordable housing, fixing the traffic. The pandemic has also highlighted the plight of essential workers. I stood alongside our coalition of Fight for 15 just yesterday. We got great press highlighting the terrible conditions that our essential workers are in. And I've co-sponsored bills to help out with hazard pay. And we'll be pushing for that in CARES too. To the issues of healthcare in general, which is always one of our biggest values, expanding Medicaid, getting a public option, getting to as close to 100% and not resting until we get 100% of people covered. And I know that's a big issue that we'll continue to fight for. Fixing the traffic. That's something that we could pick up Republican votes on because everybody's frustrated about that. Independents are frustrated about that. And we're working to get that beyond I-4 ultimate funding and to expand Sunrail into the Polk County area and to work with Brightline for high-speed rail to really help out. And it's going to be different, right? After the pandemic, it's going to be different. And we're going to have to look at a lot of those things. And of course, making sure that we can help out with everything from education to the environment to helping out with immigrant rights and so many other civil rights that we hold dear. But overall, just to make sure that every American is treated equitably and equally with regard to all these issues. So thank you all for what you do. We are so very grateful for you being on the call. And please feel free to share this in your internally among different Democratic clubs, among your DECs, and among Democratic faithful. We deliberately did this on the unofficial side so that it could be something where we could talk specifically about democratic values and share them so that you could share them with others who couldn't be here today. So thank you, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe. God bless you all, and together we will survive this. Thank you.